Been traveling with Jacob, and this last week we dealt with the whole sordid affair of his daughter Dana getting raped, and in looking at that story we kind of looked at a couple of aspects of it in the sense of that was in Genesis.
34 and 35.
Yeah, 34 and 35 is what we dealt with last time. But in looking at that story, the whole Dana incident, which is in chapter 34, you kind of got to look at things and say, okay, well, here's a man who's following after God, and he's hearing directly from God. He is saved, and yet his daughter gets raped. And in life, we're all going to go through different things, and many of which are basically just life. If you look at the gospel account, she fell out of the chair. If you look at the gospel account of when the disciples were in the boat and they were going across the Sea of Galilee, and that storm arose, and Jesus quietens down the storm, there's a little tail end at the end of that, and it says there that there were many other boats with them. In other words, the disciples were going through that storm, and there was a purpose for that, and Jesus ministered to them in that storm, but at the same time there were a bunch of other boats on the lake as well. They were going through the same storm. The difference being that Jesus was in the disciples' boat. And there was a purpose, there was a reason for it, and there was a teaching in it. So too, you and I are going to go through the storm of life. Nowhere in the Bible does God say, I've come to give you life and happy days hereafter. It says that I've come to give you life and life abundantly, yeah, and life will be a lot fuller. But at the same time, the Bible also teaches us that there's a plan and a purpose to just everything and anything. So even in the midst of a storm, when you're going through something negative, as a Christian, having Jesus in your boat, you can turn around and say, okay, so what's in this for me? What is the teaching? What do I get out of this? As opposed to the non-Christian who doesn't have Jesus in his boat, as it were, he goes through the storm and he's, what now? There's a big difference between the two. So, going through storms in life, that's just part of life. It's not necessarily as a repercussion for something you have or haven't done, but there are repercussions for our actions, and that's kind of what we're going to look at today. And life in general is going to be full of storms. That's the nature of life. As opposed to looking at it, why me? And taking the viewpoint of, oh, this is happening to me. I'm getting persecuted. Life is so tough and life is so hard. You think life is hard? Go to Africa. That's when you'll see life is hard. Honestly, you go and look at how the majority of the people on that continent live, and you'll see what life is really and truly like. Yeah, you don't have to worry about walking down to the river to go and get water and hopefully coming back because a crocodile's got a hold of you or a hippopotamus has eaten you. We worry and we think, oh, lions are probably a deadly creature down there. No, the majority of people that are killed by wild animals are killed by hippopotamus. Whole different ballgame. So the title of this message this morning is the 10 suggestions, obviously coming from the 10 commandments. So in the story of Dana getting raped, we got to look at the story and we kind of look at it and we say, okay, so why? Is it something that she brought upon herself? Was she of a promiscuous nature and running around with a group of guys? Was she dressed inappropriately and hanging out at pubs? And why? What's the cause of this? And yet we look at that story, and all we see there is that in chapter 34 of Genesis, it says, now Dana, the daughter of Leah, whom she had born to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. She literally just went looking for friends. She didn't go looking for male companionship. She just went looking for a friend. And the mere fact that they were living in that area, it's perfectly natural to want to go and find a friend. So she wasn't doing anything wrong. So what then? Whose fault is it? Is this just a consequence of life? Or is this born out of a repercussion of something? Well, the fact that she's there in that area looking for a friend, why? Dad's brought her to that area. Now, if dad takes male, female child to an area, that child is going to naturally assume this is an okay place because dad brought me there. It's funny how quickly a child will look at the actions of their parents and say, this is okay. For me personally, in the household that I grew up with my mom, it was okay for promiscuity because that's what I was brought up with. Saturday morning, I was like, who's coming out this morning? Who's my new dad? That's what I grew up with. So as I got older, I thought that was perfectly normal. And that's the lifestyle I got into. So parents will see something and they'll emulate it. And kids will see something and they'll emulate it. And kids being placed in a situation that the parents have placed them in, well, it must be a safe place. So too here with this young lady. And she goes out looking for friends. Well, there is now the starting place for this little teaching this morning and these 10 suggestions. You know, God says that He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So when God says, this is what I want you to do, it's not going to change over time. It's not going to change according to your circumstance. In other words, the 10 commandments that were given to us, well, they were given to my great-great-great-great-grandfather. But times have changed, therefore they're not applicable today. It's funny how we look at things like that when we start to justify why we do not hold true to those 10 commandments. Our very laws in this country were set up and were established on literally the 10 commandments. I mean, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If you kill, your life's going to be taken from you. Oh, but hold on a second, there's circumstances. There's mitigating circumstances. Now when somebody kills, is it justifiable homicide? Is it this? Is it that? Just a crime of passion. How's that now justify you murdering? And all of a sudden there's no more an eye for an eye, there's no more a life for a life. It's changed. So too, we change it for ourselves as Christians. And with this incident here, in Genesis 35, verse 1 and 2, it says here, then God said to Jacob, arise and go to Bethel and dwell there. So God gives Jacob, the head of this family, a very, very specific instruction. He says, go to Bethel and dwell there. Go to the house. Bethel means house of God. So go to the house of God and stay there. He's sending them back to right in the midst of what is going to be the promised land today. Okay, because that's where he came from. So he's telling him to go back there. And verse 2 says, and Jacob said to his household and to all that were with him, put away the foreign gods that are amongst you and purify yourselves and change your garments. Let us arise and go up to Bethel. So Jacob at this point, he hears from God. He hears specific instruction. There's no questioning it. There's no denying it. He confirms this instruction. By his own mouth, he confirms it. And he tells his people, right, we are going to get right, and we are now going to go up to the house of God, and we're going to stay there. So he's confirmed it. There's no confusion about this whole about that whole instruction that God gave him. Jump back to Genesis 31. Genesis chapter 31. Remember I just said to you, God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow? What if we jump backwards to chapter 31, and we're in verse 2. Verse 3. God now says to Jacob, this is the first time that he speaks to him, he says, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, I'll be with you. That's the first time God gives him this instruction. Jacob hears it. Again, Jacob confirms this when he speaks to his wives, and he says to his wives, hey, the Lord has told me to leave, and that we're going to go. And he goes, he starts going. But then we see in chapter 33, jump over to chapter 33. In chapter 33, verse 18, now, Jacob and his family, having heard from God, they're moving now back to where Jacob was originally from, and this is going to be in the heart of the promised land, okay? And God then speaks to Jacob again and says to him, okay, you're going to go to a very specific place, Bethel, which is right in the middle of this promised land, and they're on the way there. Chapter 33, verse 18 says to us, then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. It's not in the promised land yet. It's not where God sent him, okay? When he came from Pandamaram, and he pitched his tent before the city. So now Jacob is coming along, off to the promised land where he should be, where he heard he's supposed to be, where God said to him go. And on the way, he gets to this little place called Shechem. Now Shechem, as we said on Wednesday, the word Shechem means ridge. Okay? So this village town is placed upon a ridge, upon a hill. Got a good view. And he's pitched, this is where he's pitched his tent. It's an idiom. It's a saying as in, okay, this is where he's going to make his home. This is where he's settling down. So here, he's on this ridge. You can see the promised land from where he's at. It's right on the border. But that's where he chooses to live. Where did God tell him to live? God didn't say to him, well, get close to the border. God didn't say to him, just go over the border. God sends him to this place called Bethel. An interesting Bethel, house of God. He's sending him to a place within the promised land that is right in the promised land, the house of God. So he's saying to him, don't just go across the border, go right in. And here, he pitches his tent. When we talk about the pitching of the tent, jump back over to Genesis 13. Doing a little bit of jumping this morning, but we'll slow down now. Genesis 13 deals with Lot. Now, Lot is Jacob's grandfather's nephew, so you figure out the relationship to him. And so Genesis chapter 13, verse 10. Abraham and Lot had a problem in the sense that they've gathered so many cattle in there that their herdsmen were fighting over land for the cattle to graze. Abraham comes forward and says to Lot, hey, we both can't stay here. We're going to have to go our separate ways so that there's no more fighting in the land. And he says to Lot, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. You take first pick. So it says here in verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Interesting, the little clarification here. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, if you go down to the southern end of Israel today, where the Dead Sea is, it is one of the most arid places that I've seen. I mean, it is hot, it is desolate. I mean, there is nothing there. In fact, the Dead Sea itself is literally that. It is stone dead. Okay, the only thing that grows there are salt crystals. I mean, there is no other form of life. That water gets increasingly more salty every single year as the sea kind of recedes. That is historically and biblically the site of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what history and archaeologists point to. And here, the Bible is telling us that this area was well watered, like the Garden of Eden, before this calamity took place, before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Little side note on that. I'm in the Dead Sea, and I've gone down there with my pastor, my youth pastor, and a couple of people from our church. And I'm out there, I'm floating in it, and it's just wonderful. And you don't even have to float, you can just kind of like sit, and it's like sitting in a big armchair. That's how buoyant it is, right? And there's a lot of people there. And my son comes down. My son at that time, Matthew, is about almost 5 years old. He turned 5 over there, so he's almost 5 years old. And walks down, and I call, hey, Matt, come in. Now, I'm being looked at now at this point for a pastoral position. And Matt walks in to the water, and he gets about this deep. And the saltiness starts having its effect. And he looks at me, and he just stops. He looks at me, Dad, it's burning my bum. Oh, my boy, thanks a lot. So it's amazing how the Lord will humble you. So this is now where Lot is, okay? It's lush, it's green. He's lifted up his eyes and he's seen it's good for cattle. Hey, I can make some green here. I can make money here. Because that's what the grazing translates to in Lot's day, right? Money. Don't worry about family. So then it says here, I'm like the garden of the Lord. That's how well it was watered. Like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Also, very fertile, very profitable land. Verse 11. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. And verse 12, Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and he pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. So again, Lot now makes a choice, and he's pitching his tent towards Sodom. And we saw with Lot's life previously that here he makes a choice and he pitches his tent towards Sodom. I see the potential, I see the money. The next thing we hear about is Lot is now living in the city of Sodom. And his family is now starting to adopt the lifestyle. Sodom is where we get the word sodomy from, the Sodomites. Okay? Interesting how we'll change words to soften the crime as time goes on. I've said this before, like if you're going to steal something, steal money, it's no longer you're a thief, you're misappropriating funds. There's a fancy word. Sounds like you've got a degree all of a sudden. No, you're a thief. But then the progression, the downhill slide was there's fertile land, potential of money. Now we're in the city. Now his family's starting to get involved in all of this. And we see that when Lot is eventually going to get removed from the city and the angels come, his daughters have got sons-in-laws. So they've married into this mess. Then we see the next step with Lot is he's seated in the gate of the city. He's now an official in that city. That kind of has got to scare you up. It's got to shake you up a little bit. So too here with our brother Jacob. Jacob looks at this Shechem and he sees, you know what? This is good for cattle. This is profitable. And he sets up his tent there. He's in sight of the promised land. He's just set up an altar. It's kind of like he's put a big fish stick on the back of his vehicle. Same thing. He's got a big, he's got the Jesus t-shirt. And he can see the church on a Sunday morning. He's not at the church, but he can see the church. Start seeing the similarities that are happening here. And what happens? His daughter gets violated. Last night, I was hoping for a really good night's sleep. And because the night before I didn't get one. Oh man. The night before, I was, when you're half asleep, half awake, and in my half awake, Shell's thanking me already. I'm not going to throw you under the bus, Sass. But in my half awake state, I was convinced that I could hear a creaking floorboard in the house. And this is probably a scary thought, but I reach for a pistol and a flashlight, and I'm looking for this person in the creaky floorboards, and it's just past kicking back in, and I'm freaked out, so I didn't get a good night's sleep for the rest of the night. Last night I was really hoping for a good night's sleep. Yeah, probably about 2 o'clock this morning. The guineas, our guinea fowl, the guineas go off, and what's happened is a couple of days ago we finally opened up the door to the coop and let the guineas out. Guineas are notorious for not being the smartest animal around, and we've had one flock already, of which one survived. Now, just recently we bought another flock, and we kept them in the coop in the hope that they would learn that's their home, and they do come back to the coop every single night, except they roost on top of the coop. Well, bobcats and everything else around there, you know what's going to happen to them. So about 2 o'clock this morning, I heard one of them shouting for help, and I went out with a flashlight, and I had just the 22, the little AR, because that's good for the vermin. And I went out there, took a shot, and walked around a bit more to see if I could find the rest of them. Found a lot of feathers, and I heard this crunch, 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 and kind of followed in. I thought, well, something's eating. And I followed into the brush and that. And I got from here to probably maybe about the back of the room over there. And I walked in on a big old boar. A massive, massive boar. I mean, he is huge. And he immediately just started to grunt. He wasn't happy with me being there. I got a tutu in my hand. This is like going to a medieval jousting competition with a toothpick. I mean, I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, okay, I'd rather throw the gun into that. And so I backed up and I got behind a tree, one that's got a fork in it so that I could, jump if needed be. And this thing just stood his ground and grunted and grunted and grunted. And my flashlight died on me. You got to be kidding me. And at that time, there was no moon out at that time. And I'm standing in the brush now. I got a pair of sandals on. And my traditional African way. And it's pitch black. This thing's grunting at me. And I'm figuring, okay, do I leave the safety of the tree and head back on home? Or what do I do? And it's pitch black. And eventually I was like, okay, let's go. And I took off. And it's funny, and how this all comes back, the pig is a side note, but the guineas have got this place of safety. I mean, there's been many critters that try and get into this coop. This coop is wired underneath. It's wired all the way around. Nothing can get into it. Unless, of course, the door's open or something like that. And yet the guineas will come and roost on top of the coop. Is that not the story of Jacob? God says to him, Jacob, go to the house of God and go and stay there. Go and get into the coop. Stay there where it's safe. And Jacob goes and roosts on the coop, just like these stupid guineas. And then you wonder why. Okay, whoa. His daughter getting raped. His sons turning into murderers. Is this because Jacob was disobedient? Is this now God punishing Jacob? Because there's a lot of our faiths which lean in that direction. Well, I have a hard time with that because the Bible tells me that God is love. God also tells us in the Word there, He clarifies what is love. It's patient, it's long-suffering, it does not keep a record of wrongs. Going to Corinthians chapter 13. God also says that He has the unique ability to not only forget about your sins or forgive your sins, but He's got the unique ability to forget about them. In other words, not bring them up to you anymore. So, if you want to adopt the philosophy of some of our Christian, and I use the term loosely there, teachings that, this is a repercussion of your sin, I would find that hard to believe. Because if God forgets about my sin, why is He now going to punish me for something He forgot about? That would be akin to me calling in my voice and saying, hey, I don't know what you did wrong, but I'm going to punish you anyway. That's not totally foreign to me. There was a time at school where a group of us had gotten into trouble, and we stood before the principal, and the principal called Wayne and myself, my best friend Wayne. He called us to the front of the line, asked us what had happened. We told him. He said, fine, everybody come in one at a time. We came in, bent over. We got caned. When Wayne and I got caned, he said to us, go to the back of the line. What do you mean? He said, you guys are clearly instigators. Go to the back of the line. He didn't even know the facts, but we were going to get punished for something, and we were the instigators. But that's beside the point. He didn't know it, and he couldn't prove it, but we got punished for something we didn't do. But that's not God. That is not God. So he did not get punished for not obeying God. But yet, his family was really, really impacted. So if he's not punished, then what is it that led to this? Go to Proverbs, book of Proverbs, chapter 9. Go to the middle of your Bible, and then just go to the right, just a tad, and you'll find the book of Proverbs. Now, Proverbs is written by Solomon. Solomon specifically asked God for wisdom in the beginning of his reign, and God granted him that. And then Solomon goes on and he writes all these proverbs. I mean, Solomon was an incredible man, and he was truly given a lot of wisdom by God. Go home and try and write a proverb, something that will last for thousands of years, that people will read and say, oh, well, there's a pearl of wisdom. That's something that I can take to heart. Well, Solomon writes many of them. And in this proverb, chapter 9, he's talking about wisdom here. And he gives wisdom this characteristic. Now, ladies, please note that in verse 2 of chapter 9, it says there, she. Notice that? Solomon refers to wisdom as she. So, anyways, nothing more to be said on that. But in this proverb, in verse 10, he's talking about wisdom. And he says here, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You want to be wise, know who God is. Now, that fear of the Lord is not I'm quaking, I'm trembling, I'm scared. That is not what it is. And yet it is what it is. What do I mean by that? If you truly understand who God is, it is a very fearful thing. Because you look at the Old Testament, God over and over again says to different people in the Old Testament, you can't come and just walk up to me face to face and have a chat with me, because I can't be in the presence of sin. And therefore, if you are in my presence, you will die. Yet the New Testament tells us, go step up boldly to the throne, go to God in prayer. And you are literally in the spiritual realm going into His presence. But if I go into His presence and I'm full of sin, I'm going to die. But no, you can go boldly to the throne. Why? Because you're covered by Jesus. Okay? So that sin is no longer there. You've got that covering. In the Old Testament, these guys knew and they had an understanding of this God who is so righteous, so pure, so holy, that if we get into His presence, we will die. So there is that fear factor there. But that fear factor is born from an understanding and a reverence for who He actually is. His awesomeness, His holiness. And the other side of that is, okay, if I do not have Him in my life, now there should really be a fear. If I don't have Him in my life anymore, what now? So when the New Testament says to us, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling, to me that kind of lets me know, hey, hold on a second, don't take what you've got for granted. Because is it a done deal? Are you always going to have it? And this is something that Sandra and I were going back and forwards about. Well, have a look at Paul. Paul makes reference to a couple of people in the New Testament saying there that he's left his faith. He's walked away. Go to the Old Testament and you'll find genealogies there, and then they're repeated. And normally you come to those genealogies and, oh man, this is boring, it's just a bunch of names. But when you go through those genealogies, you'll find that in later genealogies, there's names that have disappeared. They're gone. And then if you go over to the book of Revelation, it says there, what? That your name will get blotted out of the Lamb's book of life. So now I'm so kind of, oh, my name was in the book of life, and it may get blotted out the book of life. So now all of a sudden I stop taking it for granted. So now I start working out my own salvation in fear and trembling. I want to make sure that I'm right with God. So it's a day-to-day walk. And it's not a day-to-day walk in the sense of fear in, oh boy, I better go to church, I better do this, I better pray, because I might be blotted out of the book of life. No, that's not what it is at all. Okay? This is simply a walking with God, with obedience. And obedience is the key to all of this. So now it talks about this wisdom and the fear of the Lord and the understanding. Now the obedience, how do you come to this understanding and the fear of the Lord? How do you come to an understanding of who God is? Well, that is what this book is. This book is basically a picture of God. If I drove past every day, if I drove down the main road in my vehicle, and you guys didn't know me, and you saw me drive by every single day, there may come a day where you wave, and there may come a day where I wave back. And if you're related to somebody else, oh yeah, that guy in the funny little green car with the long hair and kind of weird, I heard he speaks funny. He seems nice, he waves at me every morning. That's all you know about me. But until such time as we actually start having a dialogue, a one-on-one dialogue, you don't know me. You don't know my character. You don't know what my heart is. You don't know what my shortfalls are. You don't know anything about me. You've got a perception, and you've got what somebody else tells you online, but you personally don't know me. This Bible tells you who God is and what his character is. And that's why, to me, it is so important that it is presented correctly. When Moses was prohibited from going into the promised land, he was prohibited. Why? Because he misrepresented who God was. He misrepresented to the Jewish people at that time that God was angry with them. He misrepresented God's face. So he's painted a picture that's distorted. That's where that problem comes in. So this wisdom that we supposedly gain out of this word, in order to gain the wisdom and to actually get a picture of who God is, you've got to now start looking at the different stories that are put in here to start ascertaining God's character in different places. I want to go to the book of Samuel chapter 15.
First or second?
That'll be first Samuel. You know, you've always got to put me on the spot. Huh?
No.
We'll get to second now. This is an interesting story. So in 1 Samuel chapter 15, King Saul is reigning. And way back when the Jews were traveling out of Egypt, there was a nation who picked on the Jews, the Agagites. And what they did is they kind of picked on the people that were traveling at the back of the pack. Now, who's going to be walking at the back of the pack? Those that are slow, those that are feeble. So in other words, the Agagites picked on those that were weakest, and they killed them all. And God has an issue with these people. And now, years and years and years later, God says to Saul, you guys need to go to these Agagites or the Amalekites and go and wipe them out. And not only them, but all the cattle, all their possessions, sack the cities, burn it. In other words, I don't want anything of their culture to contaminate you. So Saul goes down, and in chapter 15, verse 3, it says, now go and attack Amalek. And after you destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey. Now, if you go back to the book of Joshua, don't turn there, but in Joshua, the first city that Joshua goes into, Jericho, God does the same thing. He instructs them to destroy everything. After that, they are entitled to take the plunder from the cities and keep it. There's a percentage that goes to the temple or to the priests, but there's a percentage that the people can keep. But in this instance, and in Jericho, they were to wipe out everything, every last thing. So then, if we jump over now, also in chapter 15, in verse 13, Samuel the prophet comes over to Saul, but Saul is now traveling back from this battle. Now Saul didn't listen to God. Saul kept a bunch of the cattle, and he also kept the king. And why? The reason for that is tradition holds, and this carried on for many centuries, that when a conquering king comes back into his land, he'll come in riding on a white horse, and behind him the conquered king, which would normally be reversed on a horse, or not on a horse, on a donkey, he'd be reversed. He'd be led in. The king would be leading this guy in. It was humiliating, and then he'd be put to death in front of the nation. And it was almost to like exalt the king. So here, Saul doesn't listen to God. He keeps the king, and they keep a bunch of the cattle and things. So verse 13, Samuel the prophet, Samuel steps in and he says, then Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Now the commandment of the Lord was very specific. Kill everything. Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? So Saul immediately says, hold on a second, it's the people. And then Samuel goes on and he says to him, so that's the people. What about the king that you didn't kill? And Saul says to him, no. We are going to put him to death. And what he should have just said is, I brought him because I wanted to do like a bit of a show and tell when I got back home and prove how great I was. Samuel doesn't take anything of it. He just puts the guy to death. interesting thing here. Remember I said everything goes back to obedience now? Not the 10 suggestions of the 10 commandments. And when God says go into the promised land, He means go into the promised land. Don't sit on the ridge and look at the promised land. Well, if you jump over now into 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel now gives us an account that the book of Chronicles and Kings doesn't give us, because at the end of Saul's life, we'll see Saul is involved in a battle. And in that battle, all his kids die. And this was prophesied, and it comes to pass. So all his kids get put to death, Jonathan and the rest of them, they get put to death. Then Saul is hit by an archer, and he's busy dying. And in those other 2 books, it tells us that Paul then turns around to his armor bearer and he says to his armor bearer, hey, kill me, I'm dying anyway, and I don't want to be captured by these guys and then put to death anyway, so kill me now. And the armor bearer says no. So Paul grabs his sword and he falls on it. That's where it leaves off. This account, though, is pretty interesting, because here David gets to hear about this battle and the conquering of Israel, or the Israel forces under Saul. And a man comes up and comes running up to David, and verse 5 in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 5 says, so David said to the young man, who told him, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan, his sons, are dead? So this guy's bringing back a report to David, okay? So this young man says to David here, the young man who told him said, as I happened by chance, I put that by chance underlined, coincidence. As I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his spear. What he did is he placed the spear, the other term for his sword, on the ground, and then he falls forward onto it. He's committing suicide, okay? It's kind of hard to slit your own throat with the sword kind of thing, so that's how they did it. So he says he's leaning on the sword, or leaning on his spear. And indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. So I came across Saul, he's leaning on this spear, he's run through, but he's not dead yet. And I'm looking, and the chariots and the horsemen are approaching of the enemy, okay? He's not dead, and they're coming. Verse 7, now when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called me. And I answered, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? So I answered him, I am an Amalekite. That should be highlighted in everybody's Bible. I am an Amalekite. When Saul went and conquered the Amalekites, and he was told to put everybody to death, it says there that they killed everybody except this king. So while Saul was driving around with his trophy and coming back, because this doesn't happen in a day, these are months and years and that go by in between these little sections of scripture that we read. Whilst he's driving back with his trophy, evidently that king sired a son, Amalekite. This is the only Amalekite that's left. God's instruction was to Saul to put everybody to death. This guy now says to David, I'm an Amalekite. So if you jump into verse 15, verse 13, I beg your pardon. Then David said to the young man who told him, where are you from? And he answered, I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite. So David said to him, how was it you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the young men and he said, go near and execute him. And he struck him so that he died. So David said to him, your blood is on your own head, for with your own mouth you testified against yourself, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed. Kind of a weird turn of events. This young man comes to David and says to David, hey, King Saul is dead. David says to him, how do you know? He said, well, I got there, Saul's lying on his spear, the enemy's coming. King Saul says to me, please kill me so that the enemy don't get hold of me. So I killed Saul. David turns around and says to him, hold on a second, you killed Saul and has him put to death? That's not right. Yes, it is right. What did God say initially? All of them are to get put to death. The very man that Saul spared because he wanted to use him as a trophy, the very man that he spared is responsible for his own death. It's amazing how Jacob was told to go somewhere and camped on the doorstep, didn't do fully what he was supposed to do, and there were repercussions. His family paid the price. Look who else died in this battle. All of Saul's sons, his family, his entire family at this point was put to death. Now, before this happens, before this battle happens, Saul says to Samuel, come and pray with me. And Saul goes up to the temple and prays, and God doesn't answer him. Now, before they go into battle, they would typically go and pray about it, and God would say, okay, go and do this, go by this route. And it says there that Saul prayed, but God didn't answer him. He then went to the priests. And when the priests inquired of the Lord, it says there that when they asked of the Urim and Thummim, there was no answer. There was no word of prophecy. There was nothing. God was silent on this life. Saul had already embarked on a war of disobedience. He embarked on a passage where he was glorifying himself. The fact that he brought this Amalekite king back was literally just to glorify himself. Now go back to that Lamb's Book of Life that we spoke about. Once saved, always saved? Not so much. Paul was an anointed king. Saul was an anointed king. Saul had a relationship with God. And yet, God turns his back on him. Why? Because he walked away. He wasn't in subjection anymore. In fact, when Saul went and inquired of the priests couldn't even hear from God on his behalf. And then when we look at the conversation later on between God and Samuel, God says, it regrets or it repents me that I anointed Saul as king. It's not God saying, oh boy, I goofed on that one. I messed up. God knows and knew what Saul was going to do. He chose Saul specifically because the people wanted a king of physical presence. They wanted a big man. That's what they got. And it's not that God was, oh, I didn't see that coming. God was merely expressing, man, it hurts my heart because my children are suffering under this. God knew best. God's selection was for David, the runt of the litter, the one brother that was sent out to look after the sheep, who was the unclean one. That's who God's choice was. And look what David did. David was the best king that they ever had. And yet he was the little guy. He couldn't even carry Saul's armor into battle. So, again and again and again, what comes through for me is that the commandments that are in here, you and I will say, okay, so what's God's will for me? And you get petrified. Oh, is this God's will? Is it not God's will? And you kind of analyze things to the point that you are stagnant, and fear almost sets in and it paralyzes. One of the great preachers in the past turned around and said, I don't have a problem with not knowing God's word. The problem I have is with the portions that I do know. You don't have to know everything in order to walk according to what God's will is. Walking with God is simply a communication, day by day communication with God. There's a guy in the Bible called Enoch, and it says there that Enoch walked with God and was no more, for God took him. That's what the verse says. It literally is that Enoch had a relationship with God, a daily walking with God. And it got to the point where Enoch was just no more. Enoch walked with God long enough that at some point, Enoch and God stopped, and God kind of looked back and said, you know what, Enoch, we're that far to your house, my house is a lot closer, come, let's go. And he just took him. Enoch at that point didn't have the Bible. So how did Enoch know what to do and what not to do? He just walked with God. It says to us there that, and this is Samuel talking to Saul, and Samuel says to Saul, I can hear the bleating, and here's the king, but hold on a second, you telling me that you're bringing all of this so that you're going to have a sacrifice to God? And then Samuel says to him, doesn't the Lord demand obedience above sacrifice? The sacrifice is a picture of and a type of the law and all these things that these guys had to do. And you didn't know what to do, when to do it, unless you knew what the law said. So these guys, knowing what the law says, was going to sacrifice, and Samuel's saying, oh, hold on a second, you might know what it says and everything, but there's a greater thing, and that's obedience. So as far as the obedience goes, how can I be obedient to something that I don't know? It's too complex. There's so many different aspects. You can see now, just as we've spoken on one little topic, we've reached from Genesis right the way through to Revelation. We've touched on right in the beginning, we've touched in the middle, we've touched on both sides, and in the end, different places of the Bible on one little topic. So how do I know what God's will is? Jesus came along and he simplified it. And he just turned around and he said, it's easy. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, for some of us, and personally I speak to this, when Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself, I kind of sit there and I think, really, Lord, you really want me to do that? How do you love your neighbor in the way that Christ meant it until you learn to love yourself? It's one thing to grasp that Christ went to the cross for you and your sins are forgiven, that they are covered by his blood, that God doesn't even remember them anymore. That's all good and well, Lord. But what about me? I remember my sins. What about that? That, I think, for many of us, is a harder task than accepting God's forgiveness. The accepting that I need to forgive myself as well and get over it. And, I mean, it's a harsh thing to say, oh, get over it, move on. It's not meant that way. But until such time as you move past that, until such time as you get over it, how are you going to love your neighbor as you love yourself? Because there's a lot of things for me, I'm very harsh on myself. So when you say to me, okay, love my neighbor as you love yourself, all right, fine, I'll love you. You don't want that. Going back to first service this morning, everything, but everything, needs to start in the church. And that includes this whole revival thing that we've got going, that we use very glibly. The revival needs to start in the churches, needs to start in each one of us individually. And the revival is, as the Lord says, sin requires death. Revival is reviving, bringing new life in. And if you cannot forgive yourself, and you cannot get past the fact that my sins are forgiven, therefore there's not death waiting for me, revival is not going to start. It's not going to start in each one of our hearts. And if we cannot bring revival to ourselves, how are you going to save the person next to you? How are you going to revive the person next to you? How are you going to be able to give them the good news, the message of the good news? It's a tall order. Those little bag of pennies and quarters, as we spoke first service, we're moving the bag now. And we're widening that circle. The challenge, the Tide Pod Kiki challenge, whatever you want to call it. Now it moves on to when God speaks to you about something, when he convicts your heart on something, whether that's to do something, not to do something, just go and say hello to someone. And you don't do it. The challenge now is take a quarter and throw it in that bag. And the quarter stands out from the pennies. And it's not the amount. I just want something that's striking. So to look in my bag and kind of see where I'm at. That bag is not for, oh, we're going to bring it in here and come and compare bags. No, that's not what you're going to do at all. That bag is, I just want you guys to just be able to look at that bag and see where you're at. And hopefully that will prompt you to go to God boldly to that throne of grace, saying, Lord, you know what? I just threw 50 pennies in here and 10 quarters. Help. That's all it's about. Okay? Let's pray. Father God, we just thank you.